Session is still on. So, as I said, we are now on the report by Mr. Oliveira, developing a new anti-poverty strategy. I will first give the floor to Mr. Oliveira, who is the rapporteur. Please, Mr. Oliveira.
Thank you, President. Commissioner Minsatu. Well, eradicating poverty, that's a political choice, and it's the choice that we would like to take. The report we're discussing today sent out a strong political signal that the response to economic and social problems that people face every day cannot simply be pushed into the background of our political priorities. Poverty reflects an unfair distribution of wealth, and to eradicate it, you need to eradicate it from the root with policies that ensure fair distribution of wealth. Poverty compromises human rights. It compromises political, economic, social and cultural rights. To eradicate poverty, these rights need to be given form as universal and indivisible rights. Eradicating poverty requires a global approach that deals with the problem in its multiple dimensions without compartmentalizing its different facets. Eradicating poverty has to be a cross-cutting factor of sectoral policies. Combating social and economic discriminations leave people more vulnerable to poverty, particularly women, old people, disabled people, migrants, minority ethnic communities, people with different sexual orientations, people from rural areas, people who are cut off from access to education or from technological communications. So we need the correct political response at the European level, at the national level, and at the regional and local level, where the effectiveness of policies is actually tested on the ground. We need sufficient funding for the strategy to ensure that it's effective in actually eradicating poverty by 2035. We need to mobilize the necessary funding from the EU budget and national budgets too. It calls for political participation of the people in a situation of poverty in defining the policies that affect them. they should help to evaluate them so that they can be properly implemented and adjusted over time. We're talking about the lives of 21% of the European population, 93 million children, 20 million children. The approach that we've taken in this report is that eradicating poverty requires a broad range of instruments to achieve the objective. We need to promote full employment, fair salaries, improved working conditions, better balance between work and family life, and tax justice. There should be a universal right to housing. We have to consider the urgency of helping the homeless, but also helping people from the working class who can't afford housing. It also includes investment in universal public services that have high quality levels, giving access to education, health, culture, transport and communications, energy, and to a balanced environment. It requires robust social policies that include social inclusion, such as a minimum income. We should combat child poverty and give more priority to the child guarantee. These are some of the most important instruments that are stated in this report on the first ever EU strategy for combating poverty. I hope the Commission sees these as a reference point for the policies that they then enact. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Vice President Minzato.
Thank you, honourable members. As you know, this year we will adopt the European Union's first ever anti-poverty strategy. And this should send a clear signal that in 2026 we cannot accept that around 93 million people, that is 20% of the EU population, are at risk of poverty, are at risk of social exclusion. And that 1 million people experience the most severe form of poverty, and this is homelessness. We want to send a strong message that nobody should feel forgotten. On the contrary, we want to stand by and support people that are facing hardships at a crucial time in their lives, when the cost of living has become a huge concern and when many cannot afford basic goods and services. An EU strategy to tackle poverty can only be a collective endeavour, starting by its design. We have consulted very broadly member states, civil society, businesses, social partners, people experiencing poverty, including children, and we have collected a broad array of evidence and recommendations on a good way forward. The Parliament's INI report is obviously an extremely valuable contribution, and I'm very grateful for it. I'm very glad to see that our findings converge to those of this House, and I would highlight 5 elements which I think are quite important. First, taking a fundamental rights approach also means recognizing that poverty is multidimensional. Addressing poverty is not only about income, but it is also, as I was saying earlier, about access to housing, employment, education, health, childcare, long-term care, energy, transport, and other services, or food. There are also other barriers to moving out of poverty, like health issues, like disability, and many times like stigma. And therefore, it is essential to take a person-centered approach to make sure that different policies can really help and not to contribute to worsening poverty or its drivers. A second element, we need to address poverty throughout the life cycle of a person, looking at children, at youth, at working age population, and at old age, and try to focus on the specific needs of the different stages in life. And one area of focus will be the strengthening of the European Child Guarantee, as was asked in this House many, many times. Taking such life cycle approach is also a key element to intergenerational fairness. And the strategy will look into the territorial angle and the gender dimension of poverty, and this is quite important. Thirdly, I want to mention that our ambition is to combine a strong supportive approach with a strong preventive approach, meaning supporting both those in poverty today and at the same time making sure that we create mechanisms to prevent that others are falling into poverty tomorrow, in particular in the context of rising cost of living and also by focusing and investing on children and in our youth. Fourth element, we will not address poverty with just social policy alone. Even in this House and in many contexts, we debate amongst ourselves the social policy promoters. But if we want to address its root causes, we must take a systemic approach and address poverty in all relevant policy areas, ranging from energy, transport and agriculture to digital, financial or fiscal, or even justice policies. And a fifth element I want to mention is, of course, what I always say, that we need to work always together. Public and private actors, civil society and social partners at EU level, at national level, regional and communities. This also means that we need to hear the voices of those that experience poverty firsthand, and we need to recognize the value of their expertise in improving these policies. And this, for me, is quite important in delivering this anti-poverty strategy very soon. I thank you for your contributions. I'm looking forward to hearing your views and to working together to deliver on our efficient anti-poverty strategy in Europe.
Thank you. We will hear now from the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality, Mrs. Galvez.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, President, Vice President. Thank the rapporteur as well for the excellent work. But I would like to focus on a reality. Poverty in Europe has the face of a woman. It's very, very clear. 75 million women are at risk of poverty or social exclusion. This isn't. It's the result of inequality, structural inequality. It's women have more difficulties, more difficulties entering the labor market, lower salaries as well, difficult to establish our autonomy and independence as well. And that's how we end up with pensions which are very low, with a 25% gap. Poverty of women is not only an issue of economics, social justice as well. It involves something more than that. In other words, youth poverty as well, that of children. So we need policies that allow for better distribution, better policies of distribution, real policies of conciliation as well, public services, universal in nature, and guarantees for young people, for children, because a just Europe and a competitive Europe, it's not going to be possible if we leave half of the population out of the picture, that is to say, women and children. Thank you.
The group, first EPP group, starting with Mrs. Kemp. You have 2 minutes, please.
Madam President, began at the crossroads. We speak, and rightly so, about competitiveness, innovation and resilience. But Europe will not be strong if it's only efficient. It will only be strong if it is fair. Tomorrow, this House will vote on a key report ahead of the European anti-poverty strategy planned for 2026. Because fighting poverty is not optional. It is a responsibility we share. Poverty today has many faces. It is not only about income. It is about children starting life with fewer chances. It's about parents choosing between heating and food, about young people working hard but still being locked out of housing, about care responsibilities pushing families to the edge, and about older people living in isolation and insecurity. People who work, who care, who contribute and still struggle to live with dignity. Poverty is not personal failure. It is a political challenge and it requires political will. Our European model has always been a balance between freedom and responsibility, growth and dignity. When that balance is lost, trust is lost too, and in our institutions and in our European values. That is why we need a strong and credible European anti-poverty strategy. not to replace national systems, but to support them, to give direction, to coordinate better, and to make sure no one, especially children, is left behind. Parliament must decide what kind of signal it wants to send, not just with words, but with concrete choices. Because leadership is not measured by how much we promise, but by what we are prepared to stand for. So let me end this speech with a note on our children's future. Europe must ensure that a child's opportunities are not determined by their place of birth, where parents can look ahead without fear, and where growing older does not mean becoming invisible. If Europe can offer that, then it will be strong in the only way that truly matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Riordan. For SND, you have 2 minutes.
Poverty is a word that should rock the foundations of the European Union. It is a word that should grind these institutions to a halt. Poverty is violence, a violence to humanity, to democracy, to our political credibility. It's a thief. It robs children of their childhoods, and its scars last a lifetime. The memory of hunger, of cold, of anxiety, and most cruelly, of humiliation. The humiliation of wearing your mother's coat to school because yours is too small. The humiliation of knowing if you don't get food in your classroom, you won't get food at all. The humiliation of not having friends over because you know you are poor, and you know they know it too. Poverty is not a character-building exercise. There is no romance to a childhood assaulted by poverty. No child is made stronger by hunger. No family is made better by deprivation. Surviving poverty is not something to celebrate. It is something no one in Europe should ever have to endure. What if the EU treated child poverty like the emergency it is, like COVID-19, like militarisation? €20 billion is a small price to pay to liberate children from an unjust start to life and from a lifetime of servitude to humiliation. This is not charity, this is justice, and it requires political choices. The right want our strategy to be weak, to avoid enforceable action on funding, on adequate minimum incomes, on proper monitoring. We, as Socialists and Democrats, fought for concrete commitments on access to quality education, decent pay and jobs, fair redistribution of wealth and strong social protection systems. Because eradicating poverty is not just a moral responsibility, it's how we create a safe, stable and democratic union. No child chooses poverty, but the EU can choose whether it continues. Today, Europe must stop watching. Today, Europe must become the force to end poverty.
Dziękuję bardzo. W imieniu Grupy Patrioci z Europy.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Patriots, Margareta de la Pisa, carry on 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. The situation of families in Europe is very worrying, largely because of the bad decisions we take here. Cost of living, housing, destruction of jobs. But there's an anti-poverty strategy that doesn't speak one single time about correcting the policies that have put us here. The social catastrophe caused by the Green Deal, subsidies to minimum income and so on is being proposed by a communist MEP, but supported here by the majority of this House, including the EPP and the Employment Committee, who talk about social benefits. Increasing expenditure is actually going to be counterproductive. It's going to create more poverty and hold back growth. This is why our group has presented a text with a different vision. Prosperity is not created by agendas imposed by Brussels. It's made by people who take initiatives, SMEs. These are people who create growth and wealth, so let's stop weighing them down with administrative burdens. I think that we should give people back the possibility to work and to fend for their families. The best social policy is to create jobs and defend the stability of the family. while some people are talking about more centralisation, ideology and subsidies, we are calling for freedom and responsibility and real opportunities so that we Europeans can be the masters of our own future. This is the real anti-poverty strategy that we should follow. Everything else is just repeating the mistakes of the past.
Bardzo dziękuję w imieniu Grupy Europejskiej.
Well, thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Mrs. Teodorescu on behalf of ECR for 1 minute.
Combating poverty is non-negotiable. There is no political group in the European Parliament that does not want this. But there are certainly groups that mix this progressive agenda with the real need to eradicate poverty. The compromise text is at first sight full of good intentions, and the progressive rhetoric sounds very good, but we need to have the courage to look a very tough reality in the eye. You do not combat poverty through progressive ideas and by violating the right to property, but through realistic solutions. You can't say that it is right to take someone's property and to give it to someone else. And you cannot redistribute wealth like the extreme left is trying to impose. We don't want a Europe full of lazy people who are encouraged to not work and not go to school because they will get everything they need. As a negotiator for my group, I have put forward an alternative resolution that observes the principle of subsidiarity and that wants a real integration through work and education in the local infrastructure, not through Bolshevik ideology like the extreme left is trying to impose on us.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Mr. Christo Petrov.
Thank you, Madam President, dear Commissioner, dear colleagues. The most important element on this strategy is the fight against child poverty. And the most important aspects of this fight are the institutionalization as well as the child guarantee. If you are a child placed in an institution, you wake up in a building surrounded by other children. Your life is organized efficiently, but not lovingly. The adults around you are the staff, but not your family. On paper you're safe, but in practice you're alone. No institution, no matter how well run, can replace a family or a community. And when it comes to the child guarantee, the 20 billion dedicated budget is one of the smartest investments we can make. And yes, it's not a social spending. It's an investment because it's cheaper to invest now in the education and health of our children instead of paying for prisons and for long-term social assistance later. Dear colleagues, every day in this Parliament we talk about competitiveness and defense. But if we don't invest now in the future of our children, then tomorrow there will be nothing to compete with, nor anything to defend. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo w imieniu Grupy Zielonych.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Group of the Greens European Free Alliance, Mr. Ville Sonderval, 1 minute, please.
And dear Commissioner, I'm going to speak in Danish. Tak for et godt samarbejde.
Thank you very much for the good cooperation we've had on this report. I grew up in a poor background. My sister had to go out and earn money early in life, but I was lucky because the Danish welfare state came into being and I was able to get the training I needed. But unfortunately, that's not the situation across Europe. It's quite a paradox. It seems that there are quite a lot of question marks over what we've already achieved. There are parents who don't know where they're going to be sleeping next week. They don't know what they'll be feeding their children with or how they'll pay the bills. Public hospitals, nurseries, proper employment contracts, that's what's needed. And they are an important part in the Nordic social model. But other countries are different. They come from totalitarian regimes in the recent past. They've got not very powerful trade unions, for example. It seems that there seems to be a race to the bottom all too often.
Poseł Lee Anderson, 1 minuta.
On behalf of the left, Anderson Lee.
Is on the rise. This is due to the Finnish government's deliberate decisions to cut social benefits, especially social benefits for families, even though they knew it will mean over 30,000 more children living in poverty. And I think what many Finns are wondering at the moment is what is the role of these strategies and these targets if member states deliberately increase child poverty, while the EU at the same time has targets of reducing the number of children living in social exclusion and in poverty. So I think the most crucial question for the anti-poverty strategy is how will we make sure that these targets also become reality for Europeans? We need increased and dedicated funding, especially for the child guarantee. We need a very strong and stronger social dimension in the European semester. But most of all, we need much stronger political commitment from the Commission and from our political leaders.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Europe of Sovereign Nations Group, Mr. Petr Bistron, 1 minute, please.
So the EU wants to fight poverty, created by the EU, actually, particularly in Germany. The strong industrial power now, we have 170 billion, is going to have to take on this huge debt, 170 billion. So that all comes because of Brussels. So look how we're spending the money. 50 billion for migration, 16 billion for pulling out of atomic energy and promoting electromobility. These are green dreams that once again come from Brussels. And 15 billion for Ukraine. And it's not even taking into consideration the entire war machinery that you're putting together right now. My friends, right now, we don't need that. We need strong, sovereign countries which are there for their citizens and the needs of citizens and not for some sort of globalist agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Mr. Radke for 2 minutes.
Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, I'm surprised that Mr. Bistron hasn't presented his own personal program to combat poverty. After all, it's not possible for everybody, getting kickbacks from Moscow and nepotism within your party. The AfD has developed its own personal anti-poverty strategy for themselves, but of course that doesn't apply to all citizens, just for the ladies and gentlemen who accuse others of nepotism and corruption and stand up here and say that Europe and Germany have failed, where the reverse is in fact true, ladies and gentlemen. Now, on the specific political agenda here, may I say that what Ms. Kemp said, I can only endorse. It's not a question of Strasbourg dictating national policies to member states. We are trying to supplement them. The resources that are available in various programs should be better merged, used with synergies so that they can be more effective. That's what we're talking about. And Martin, you quite rightly said that poverty has many faces. Above all, poverty has many causes and many drivers, and one of them is certainly the housing markets getting out of control. People are no longer able to afford housing. Energy poverty is also a huge issue to address. In my view, it's not just a question of shifting money from one place to another. We have to really address the question of economic growth on the one hand, but we also have to address problems to get people in the best possible way to the labour market. That should be our approach. We're not wanting to just drip feed people. We want to find opportunities for them, and that has to be what we call for at European level.
Do you accept a blue card from Mr. Peter Bystron? Peter Bystron. No? Thank you. Głos zabierze pani poseł Estelle.
And now I give the floor to Mrs. Köhlemans for a minute and a half.
Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues, well, how can it still be possible that in 2026, in Europe, we still have to fight to eradicate poverty? 5 years ago, ambitious objectives were set for 2030, but social policies are under attack from the right, and now 1 European in 5 is on the risk of poverty or social exclusion. Children in a particularly bad situation. More than 1 worker in 10 is poor and can't live on their salary. But we continue to make more flexible working arrangements that are at a lower level. So poverty, social exclusion, lack of access to care and education, this is the reality for young people and for many old people as well. Europe has to maintain its compass heading for poverty reduction. 25 billion euro budget for the European Child Guarantee, massive investment in health, education and public health, quality jobs and a European minimum salary. We hear so much about strategic autonomy, but that has to fit in with the security of each European citizen, so that they can have a secure livelihood. You cannot build a flourishing Europe on a social desert. Eradicating poverty is a political choice. We have to set the course for a dignified future for all.
Sorry, do you accept a blue card from Madame Wiśniewska? No, I don't give the floor to the Parliament. Thank you. Głos zabierze pani poseł.
I give the floor to Melanie Didier for 1 minute.
In politics, good intentions are not enough to make a resolution any good. Here we are talking about the best way to fight poverty. Who could possibly be against that? But nonetheless, you have to address this subject seriously, going beyond just the electoral concerns one may have. When you talk about poverty, you have to talk about the subject as a whole. You can't just draw up a list of different communities who are more legitimate to be assisted than others, like we have in paragraph 4 of this resolution. When you want to fight poverty, you have to try to create wealth, not just putting sticking plasters on the wounds left by European Union policy. The mention of respecting our national sovereignty should not just be empty words. Social policy and housing are a major responsibility and prerogative of member states. The role of the EU is to provide the driving force to generate growth. As we say in our alternative resolution, poverty will be eradicated by work, creation of wealth and the respect of everybody's roles and responsibilities.
Bardzo dziękuję. Pani poseł, głos zabierze.
Thank you very much. Marina Malong for 1 minute.
Szanowni Państwo, ladies and gentlemen, the Commission and Parliament want to fight poverty in the EU. It's a beautiful theory. Now time has come to put it into practice. How can poverty be combated when the Green Deal is closing down businesses and taking away people's jobs? How can we protect people from poverty when trade agreements are pushing Europe agriculture out of the market? How can we reduce poverty when the lack of migration control increases pressure on social systems and national budgets? Where is the interest of Europeans in all of this? Because if production, jobs and investments are moving outside of Europe, will poverty decrease? Yes, but not here in Europe. It will decrease in Asia, Mercosur countries, everywhere where goods flow from Europe. The first plane with beef from Mercosur has already landed in Europe. Many of those countries do not take any action to protect the climate, but often they do not respect even the basic labour rights. Let us start reducing poverty with wise trade and industrial and migration policies. Europe, time is running out. Europe, let's wake up. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję. Głos zabierze pani poseł Jana Tom. 1 minuta.
I give the floor to Mrs. Tom for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Chair, Commissioner, colleagues. Of course I was prepared. You know how it goes, you know. You have 60 seconds and you write it and you measure it. It's exactly 60 seconds. But after listening to this debate, I don't want to read it up. I'm extremely worried, really. I mean, a majority of the members in this House at the moment, in this room, are on the same page. But this is not the first time we're on the same page. I was elected in 2014, and if anybody would say me back then that we will come up with first ever anti-poverty strategy, I probably would jump of joy. I'm not jumping now. Because in between, we came up with the first ever European Bill of Social Rights, not implemented. First ever minimum wage directive, not implemented. First ever child guarantee, lacking of money. We are making big promises and we are not delivering. And we don't have many attempts left because people of Europe are tired of that. So this time we really have to deliver. Otherwise, it will be the doing of far right and this will be a great mistake. Thank you.
Madam, blue card for you from Madam Wiśniewska. Thank you. Zabierze pani poseł Marie.
Okay, now I give the floor to Mrs. Marie Toussaint for 1 minute.
Chers collègues,
Madam Commissioner, it's not poverty that's shameful, it's abandonment. Now this reflects the experience of 93 million Europeans today. Abandonment. It's a political choice to allow people to remain in poverty, but it's a political choice to eradicate it. Today, we're calling for the first ever European strategy for the eradication of poverty. So let's rise to this challenge. It can't just be a declaration of intent. It has to be binding. You can't set objectives that are ambitious, but at the same time relegate social issues to a second issue behind competitiveness and other issues on the agenda. We will not eradicate poverty if there is no budget and if we do not have all of our policies behind it. No European policy should worsen the situation of those who are most disadvantaged. That is the basis of the strategy. And nothing should be done for people at risk of poverty without their involvement. It's thanks to them that we can understand that poverty is not just financial poverty, but it's a question of dignity. Permanent stigmatization is experienced by people at risk of poverty, and that has to be condemned by the law. Human dignity is affected by poverty. Let's eradicate it.
I now give the floor to Madam Leila Shaibi for 1 minute.
Madame la Commissaire, chers collègues.
Commissioner, in 2021, Europe promised to put an end to homelessness by 2030. Well, it's 2026, and 2030 suddenly has never seemed further off. There are 4 times more people sleeping in the street in France than anywhere else in the EU. Young people, workers, women, people who are unable to find a home and living in extreme poverty. Europe has not kept its promises, and this is a political failure. The platform to fight homelessness has been held up. The Housing First model hasn't been copied. The European Social Fund is being dismantled. The housing report of the European Parliament responds more to the desires of the construction lobby than the homeless. You are launching an anti-poverty strategy at a time where all EU policies are creating mass poverty. 2030 is around the corner. We are going to have to decide, are we combating poor people or are we combating poverty?
Thank you very much. Mr. Peter Volgin, 1 minute.
Хубаво е, че Европейският съюз иска да намали бедността в Европа.
The good thing is that the EU wants to reduce poverty. The bad thing is that the measures are wrong. The new strategy claims that the root causes for the growing inequalities are discrimination by race and gender and the harassment of the LGBT community. So to follow this logic, poverty would be reduced if these communities become privileged and the Istanbul Convention was ratified. But the real causes are very different. The actions of political and financial elites in Europe make rich people richer and poor people even poorer. There is no way for the majority of the European citizens to prosper when a large portion of the EU money ends up in the deep pockets of corrupt Kiev. And we are going to give them yet another 90 billion as a gift. Two things to be done. One, tax and legislative measures to ensure income distribution based on fairness and solidarity. And two, stop funding Zelensky. Let's invest in Europe.
Pan poseł Jan Peter Warnke, 1 minuta. Nie ma zgłoszeń.
Mr. Vanke for 1 minute.
Thank you.
Frau Vorsitzende, Frau Kommissarin.
President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, I can wholeheartedly support this report, and I'd like to thank Mr. Oliveira for his excellent work. Poverty is a violation of human rights and international law. Economic, social and cultural rights should be universal. They are indivisible and dependent upon one another. Social exclusion and poverty are the visible effects of an unfair and unjust distribution of wealth. However, the EU strategy will remain entirely theoretical if the rich continue to get poorer and the poorer continue to get poorer in our union. When we talk about combating poverty in Europe, it seems that we just want to throw away money for an arms race. We are damaging the future of our children. Rather than finding a solution, instead, we are becoming part of the problem. Thank you very much.
Monsieur. Blue card for you from Madame Wiśniewska. Proszę.
Merci beaucoup, Miss Przewodnicząca. Dziękuję bardzo, Pani Przewodnicząca.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Yes, dziękuję, że...
Thank you very much for having accepted the blue card. I can see that you are an open person, open to questions.
Dziękuję za przyjęcie.
Again, thank you very much for having accepted the question. You are open as opposed to the left, who is afraid of questions. The questions about the reasons for poverty in the EU. We are talking about poverty in the EU, yes, but we also need to mention that the EU is fighting with the problems it itself generates. The main reason for poverty, for the scale of poverty, including energy poverty, is the crazy climate policy. We have voted the reduction of emissions by 90% during this very session. So don't you think that we should move away from the Green Deal in order to improve the economic situation in Europe and thereby fight with poverty? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Well, I think the problem is much more multidimensional than just something that you can trace back to the Green Deal. A destroyed environment, well, that would be the worst possible thing we could leave to our children. Thanks a lot.
Dziękuję bardzo. Głos zabierze...
Thank you very much, sir. I now give the floor to Mrs. Estaras Ferragut for 1 minute and a half.
Gracias, President.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, as well. 21.4% of the European Union's population is at risk of exclusion and poverty, and the European Union will not reach those objectives as concerns those 15 million by 2030. The poverty rates in many member states is where it was, or in some countries it's increased. So this is a very alarming situation, particularly poverty among youth. We're speaking about huge numbers. Unfortunately, Spain, we have one of the highest levels of youth poverty. 10 points above the EU average, 24.2% and 34.2% in Spain. This means a total failure of the social protection system in the country. Individuals with disabilities, women, those who are at risk and vulnerable as well, they can't take advantage of what's there for them. There is no guarantee for them, no guarantee to have them emerge from poverty because of precarious working conditions. Of course, housing issues as well has created huge problems as far as exclusion. So, Commissioner, we need a real strategy to fight poverty, which is integrated, ambitious, and brings on board vulnerable individuals, young people as well, and guarantees quality work, services, and housing for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Mrs. Bischoff, a minute and a half.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President. Fighting poverty is a mammoth task. It's been the case ever since poverty has existed. And I wonder if the right of this House would be pleased if we were to ignore this problem at European level, because that's the impression I'm getting. We've got 20 million children in Europe who are expecting Europe to support efforts to solve this problem. And it's all very well to say, oh, people should just go to work. But even 1 in 10 people in a job is poor despite having a job. And the children of those parents are poor even though their parents are working. And that's why it's so important that we shouldn't just have ambitious targets. And we've had these for over 20 years in Europe. We started with the Lisbon strategy. But what we need to do with our strategy is to create tools and instruments and resources in order to help these children. That is why instruments like the Framework Directive for Minimum Income, 20 billion for the Child Guarantee, all of these targets are absolutely vital contributions from Europe in order to help reduce poverty in member states and to offer these children in poverty an opportunity, because it's clear that this state of poverty and inequality is a major danger to our democracy. And that is why the right like to sort of paint such a negative picture. Poverty can be combated with the help of Europe, but then we have to get to work and actually put our money where our mouth is.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Mr. Sekeres. 1 minute 30.
Madam President, dear Commissioner, I would like to speak in Hungarian, and I'm speaking from number 42. Are we serious? We are debating whether to spend 6 or 20 billion euros on all the poor children in Europe, while we are planning to spend more than 1 billion euros on war. We can only properly pay attention to the most vulnerable in times of peace. Then, second, in the fight against poverty, we do not need any abstract ideologies. We need proven national models that are successful. This is why the Patriots Alternative Strategy focuses on what the Hungarian and Italian governments are doing, because we have already shown what should be done. And I can share the recipe with you. Number 1, families and work must be at the center of government policy. Number 2, the vicious cycle of poverty can only be broken by jobs that provide a stable livelihood. Number 3, child poverty decreases if parents have more money. For this reason, mothers of 2 or more children do not pay personal income tax in Hungary. And similarly to Hungarian practices, young people should receive help to obtain their own homes. And finally, we need to ensure that everyone can heat their homes at an affordable price. And in Hungary, utility price reductions and home renovation subsidies also help with this. And I would like to add something. In 4 minutes, everybody was mentioned by the rapporteur, but the people living with disabilities were left out. I hope that in the end this will be corrected. Thank you.
Monsieur, do you accept a blue card from Madam Wiśniewska? Yes? Please.
Please question. Dziękuję za przyjęcie pytania.
First of all, thank you for accepting the question. I would like to say the following. I very much appreciate what you said, how poverty ought to be eradicated, how we ought to act. I would like to ask you the following. Do you see the impact of the economic situation that has been created in Europe due to the Green Deal that has hard hit the conditions of life of families in the EU and has lowered the standard of living? Do you see how the Green Deal has impacted energy poverty? Thank you very much. The mic is cut off.
Köszönöm a kérdést.
Thank you for your question. Well, I think one thing is obvious. If we want to see a Europe that works really well, where there's enough support for the vulnerable groups in society, then we need a strong economy, and the inflation generated by the war weakens this situation, and the European economy is at a disadvantage because of several reasons, partly the Green Deal that you have mentioned. I think we need to think again about the green transition, and we need to support the European economy so that we have enough money to support measures that we are talking about just now. Thank you.
Bierze pan poseł Richard Tiziu-Klaudiu, 1 minuta.
Richard Tiziu-Klaudiu for 1 minute.
Dear colleagues, the left claims to fight poverty. The right truly wants prosperity for all, since there were colleagues who wanted to go the ideological way in this debate. But my perspective is, yes, the perspective of a right-wing politician. Poverty is indeed a most dreadful reality in today's society. The lack of basic living conditions leads to disease, illiteracy, marginalization and crime. Combating poverty doesn't require budgetary resources. It is actually an investment, the most profitable one that we can make, because each euro invested today in infrastructure, medical services, education, training, tomorrow will reduce the budget that we need for healthcare, public order or social assistance. Basically, we're talking about a smart and productive reallocation of public funds. The Parliament needs to have the courage and the decency to fight poverty just as determinedly as they did it when they decided to reduce pollution levels in the EU. It is a matter of will to trigger the largest investment program in history in order to revitalize the disadvantaged regions of the EU. And the chairman interrupts the speaker.
1 minuta.
Historically speaking, policies actually divided people, always us against them, rich against the poor, and we against you. And today, many people are very Musk and Trump at your expense. And this is why this guarantees social protection, and we actually have to ensure access to water and food. I do agree the directive on minimal income, but we still need high taxation of wealth. And this would really improve the life for poor people, and the rich would still be able to live normally. So the Commission, you will show us whether you actually really want equality. So we have to start working for all of us, not just you, all of us.
Katrin Langenzipen, 1.
Katrin Langenzipen for 1 minute.
Ist es doch selber schuld.
If you're poverty-stricken, it's your fault. You didn't do well in school. You didn't pay your rent. You ended up homeless. It's your fault. In the European Union, nobody ought to be poverty-stricken, poor. That is the narrative of many individuals, that it's your own fault. No. Poverty is frequently, it's caused by families. I live on the wrong street. I have the wrong name. There's discrimination, and because of that, I don't get the job that I want, that I applied for. And No matter how many times I apply for the job, I don't get the job. In the Federal Republic, we have a chancellor who's of the opinion that in the 1990s, that if you make the effort, you will succeed. There's this just transition approach as well, and nobody ought to be left behind. That's what it said. We need investment for education, for training as well. Women poverty among certain vulnerable groups ought not be a reality. This is something that we have to invest in, and there's something that we have to fight concertedly. Thank you.
Pani poseł, głos zabierze pani poseł Hanna Jedin.
Well, cost of living is what worries people most at the moment. Food prices going up, electricity prices are going up, and it's hard to fill a basket at the supermarket for normal people. And that's in one of Europe's richest countries. That some children go to school hungry. It's shameful. Our Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson, has no solution to this. The right are saying, let's take from the poor and give to those who are already rich. In Sweden, a director receives more than 103 times as much in salary as a childcare. Many people are trying to survive on just 500 euros a month. But at the same time, it seems that there is no moral compass, as manager salaries just didn't go up and up. This is not fate. These are policies that have to change.
Bardzo dziękuję. Głos zabierze pan.
Thank you. Sergio Umberto for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, colleagues. Poverty in the European Union is not an exception, as has already been mentioned. It affects more than 95 million people. In one of the most wealthy regions of the world, this is policy failure that requires a coherent European response. Now, I think it's important that we commit to the objective of significantly reducing poverty by 2030. But this will only happen if it's taken seriously, if there are measurable targets with clear governance and mechanisms to accompany all of this. The European semester should allow for the correction of policies when they don't produce results. In Portugal and in other member states, we know that economic growth on its own is not enough. There are people who work hard but stay poor. So that's why a European strategy that's genuinely effective has to insist upon quality work, decent salaries, and access to social services. Social ambition has to go hand in hand with a strong economy, with budgetary responsibility and policies which give value to employment. Combating poverty is a political choice. This Parliament has to show that it's capable of turning commitments into actions, objectives into real results for millions of Europeans. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie pośle. Głos zabierze.
Thank you very much. Mary Mai for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Commissioner. Poverty is not inevitable. It is the result of political choices, and today we can choose differently. We will work with people who experience poverty. They must be involved from the start in shaping measures. No policy should be made without them. And let's get this straight. If poverty live, not survive from paycheck to paycheck. That is why I urge all of us to support the €20 billion for the child guarantee. Children do not decide our budgets, but they live with the consequences. And finally, in the European Union, no woman or girl should miss school or work because she cannot afford basic hygiene products. We provide toilet paper as a standard in public places. Menstrual products should be just as normal. Again, poverty is not inevitable. It's a result of political choices. Let's choose differently. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję, pani poseł.
Thank you very much. Chiara Gemma for 1 minute.
Presidente, Vicepresidente, colleghi.
President, Vice President, colleagues, we can't distribute wealth if it isn't generated in the first place. A policy against poverty has to have this in mind. We want to transform certain things into simple political propaganda. So, indeed, dependence is something that you can't get away with, that you can't just toss away if you don't have a situation where you produce, where there are jobs as well. Social conditions and dependence of individuals are the key elements here. In other words, a strategy which doesn't take into consideration the huge differences between regions, rural areas, urban areas, is destined to failure. Reducing poverty only on the basis of some sort of structural justice, which involves redistribution and doesn't take into consideration universal aspects that involves everybody, is simply an ideological reasoning, and it doesn't serve the citizens of Europe. It doesn't serve those who really have to be taken care of in this.
Thank you very much.
Oh, come on, man. It's like a little...
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Madam Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. In my speech, I would most of all like to focus on poverty as a result of disability. According to the European Disability Forum data, disability increases the risk of poverty by 61%. That is a lot. So today, discussing about the EU strategy on combating poverty, I expect the European Commission to ensure that it is in line with the strategy for persons with disabilities. Fighting poverty means that we need to strengthen the EFS Plus to be able to implement inclusive projects and ensuring independent living by deinstitutionalization and supporting assistance. Member states are not enough. We want regulations on the EU level that would ensure that institutionalized living is not possible, and to support assisted living, and that would ensure that people living there would feel in power of their life, and they would decide when to have a meal and when someone would visit them or not. Being part of a local community and personal assistance is an investment in being independent. Hence, persons with disabilities and their carers can actually have an independent life. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Alicia Oms-Hinel, 1 minute, please.
Muchas gracias, President. Thank you very much, Madam President, Vice President. We socialists believe deeply in the European social model, social and fiscal justice, redistribution of wealth, and strong and high-quality public services. This is the right path, guaranteeing that no child should live in poverty and that housing should cease to be a luxury and become a fundamental right. But Europe is showing symptoms of weakness. Workers who aren't earning enough to cover their needs, people suffering from homelessness, and the extreme right is now taking advantage of these conditions to start sowing doubts about the whole democratic system. The far right is actually an accomplice, because they are calling for tax breaks for the most privileged, which in fact destroy public systems, as is in the case in my region, the Balearic Islands. So we need to defend democracy in the European project. We need measures that create an integrated Europe and combat poverty, strengthen our social model, and make sure that poverty is banished from Europe.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Mr. Bua for 1 minute and a half. Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. Well, objectively, the share of the poor has fallen to 17% in 2024. But still, over 93 million people in the EU are at the risk of poverty or exclusion. Among children, this reaches as much as 24%. The last figure is a reason for all of us to be ashamed. EU strategy to fight poverty should widen and implement those instruments which are already available in member states. In our regions, there are many people who are active in the area of social policy. They know the needs of the local population best, and therefore I believe in the principle of subsidiarity. Let's give them money, let's support them. We are entering a very important period or stage for our social policy for the next 7 years. We have to boost the European Social Funds and the European Fund for Regional Development. I am calling for more synergy and more cooperation, more simplifications, so that beneficiaries that are fighting poverty day in, day out, so that they can be supported with simple rules and good tools. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie pośle. Głos zabierze...
Thank you very much, sir. Now I give the floor to Mrs. Dobrev. 1 minute.
Kedves képviselőtársaim!
Dear colleagues, if you want to fight poverty, then instead of statistics, data and tables, look in the eye of poor people. That's what I did. I went to a city in Hungary and talked to an 89-year-old person who lives with her daughter and receives a little bit more than 200 euros as a pension every year. And she tells me, I'm so ill, I am tired, but I don't dare to die, because then I leave my daughter alone. This is cruelty. And then you think that if you reduce the taxes that multinationals pay, then this elderly lady will have more money? No. Multinationals and big companies having to satisfy fewer rules and weaker regulations. No, this is a lie. This will not help. If a society supports the rich against the poor, this is not a solution. Ours is a solution. We support the poor.
Głos zabierze pan poseł Dan Montranu, 1,5 minuty.
Mr. Dan Montreal.
Stimată doamnă. Madam Commissioner, poverty in the European Union is not a marginal issue. 27 million people experience severe material and social deprivation. These realities are shown the level of youth that are not part of work, of education, or in training. This is not only a social problem, it's also a problem that affects economic competitiveness in the long term and should be seen as a strategic investment. I support the Commission's proposal that the EU budget for 2028-2034, at least 40% of member state funding should go to the social area. We're talking about over 100 billion euros that can make a difference in people's lives if they're directed towards concrete results. It is essential that we have a budget of at least 20 billion people for the children guarantee, a minimum of 10% for member states where child poverty is above the European average. Moreover, it is important to have a co-financing rate of at least 90% for social projects and even 95% for the eastern regions that have been affected by the war in Ukraine. And I ask the Commission that the next strategy for fighting poverty, that it support member states through a model of good practice that can be integrated in these partnership, regional and national partnership plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Marianne Wind for 1 minute.
Thank you. Kommissær. Som ung, nyuddannet hospitalslaborant I 90.
Madam President, in the 1990s, we know that there was high levels of unemployment. Back then, I packed my suitcase and went to Norway, and I went to work in the health system. However, I got pneumonia, and then I didn't have any health insurance, and I found myself unable to be treated. A lot of people in Europe have an everyday life like that. They get ill, and that illness is poverty and the working poor. What they earn is not enough to get housing, food, and basic necessities. This is a market that is not functioning properly. We have to ensure that there are good working conditions for all so that you can live on what you earn and get a pension that you can live on.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Mrs. Pietikainen. Apparently, she's not present. So I'm giving the floor now to Mr. Andrzej Saliba for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. In Europe, we cannot accept that children are raised in poverty, financial stress within a family, not enough food in their school bags. How can you expect that these children reach their fullest potential? This is unfair. This is something that we can prevent thanks to the Children's Guarantee. If the Commission needs inspiration, you can look at the Maltese model. We have taught about our vulnerable groups, an inclusive model that works for everyone. Because of our social policy, within 10 years, we have reduced poverty drastically against other tendencies in other countries. Poverty in Malta is at its lowest in Malta's history, and this is not a coincidence or a miracle. This is the fruit of our political choices. From 1.3 million on social expense, it is now 3 million this year. All of this investment is allowing us to live in a more socially just society. And this is what we need to do on a European level. Let's invest in our children to beat poverty forever.
Madam Maria Walsh.
Vice President, findings from the European Institute for Gender Equality show us that women face higher risk of poverty than men in the EU. And as we recently discussed in the FEM committee, central to this poverty hold is the gender pay and pension gap. In 2026, the women across the EU still earn less than men for the exact same work. And over the course of a woman's lifetime, the results in lower pensions mean less financial security and choice. For instance, in my member state of Ireland, women earn on average 9.6 less per hour than men. And research also shows that the average pension pot for Irish women is roughly 31% less for women compared to men, meaning women retire with substantially lower retirement savings and yet are living longer. The EU anti-poverty strategy must tackle this head-on. We need transparency in pay, stronger enforcement of equal pay laws and policies that support women in the workforce, including those in part-time or care work, which is often unrecognised and unpaid. Closing these gaps is not just about fairness, it's also ensuring economic security and dignity, fairness for millions of women across our EU. And if we are serious about reducing poverty, we need to pay close attention to poverty among women, especially these issues like pay gaps and pension fairness. Thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękuję. Pani poseł, głos zabierze pani poseł Willi.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Mrs. Blinkevičiūtė.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Madam President.
More than 90 million people in Europe, including 20 million of children, live in poverty, in the risk of poverty or social exclusion in Europe. This is not statistics. This is the sign of political failure. If we want a true social Europe, we need an ambitious and coordinated EU anti-poverty strategy which would guarantee a decent minimal income, fight against the poverty of those who work, and guarantee access to housing, healthcare and education. Breaking the intergenerational poverty is especially important. That's why the European Child Guarantee should be a measure supported by adequate financing, not just a symbolic commitment. Therefore, we should allocate 20 billion euros for Child Guarantee. Therefore, we encourage the Commission and Member States to invest in people and ensure that the economic growth is fairly distributed.
Półtorej minuty.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. 20 million children, 93 million people in the EU are directly affected by poverty. 1 in 5 children will carry the burden a lifetime long of a childhood in poverty. As a family party politician, I say this is disgraceful for Europe if we don't get to work to addressing this sorry state of affairs. I've thought for a long time about this report, as has my group. A big problem for us is as ever, the question of subsidiarity and wondering how effective European solutions will be in regions with their peculiarities. But then how much subsidiarity do we need when families are going to the wall, when 1 in 3 single parents cannot afford to give their child a healthy diet, when the minimum income is not sufficient for many families to be lifted over the poverty line? Unfortunately, social policy is often weaponized in this House, but what we need is genuine monitoring that can show us what policies work and where do we need to improve things. And until the Commission can prove to us that European social policy really works, we won't be able to create a social Europe. We should bear in mind that child poverty costs us more than 150 billion per year, but through higher social benefits and healthcare costs and so on. So the earlier we invest in families, the more we'll save later on. So this should not be an excuse for failure to act. We need to take action on behalf of these children.
Dziękuję, panie pośle. Głos zabierze pani poseł.
Thank you very much. Madam Romana Jerkovic, 1 minute, please.
Kolegice I kolege,
colleagues, Commissioner, poverty has many faces. Faces of workers who work but still cannot live of what they earn, or pensioners who have worked all their lives and now have to choose between keeping themselves warm or buying medicines, or the poverty has the face of a woman with a small pension because of badly paid work, or children who are in poverty because they were born in the wrong place. Today we have to ask ourselves, where are we going to? Frequently it is said that we are leaving the world to young people, but it seems that this is a world of poverty that we are leaving them. Now the Parliament has to focus on this problem with clear goals and good strategy which is adequately financed. Our responsibility is to leave a Europe of dignity and chances to our children and not that of fighting for survival.
Bierze pan poseł Daniel Buda.
Mr. Daniel Buda, 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, Vice President, dear colleagues. Poverty in Europe means increasingly hunger. In 2024, 9% of the EU population could not afford meat or fish every other day. And in some member states, the percentage now exceeds 30%. This shows us a rather disturbing reality. Access to food is not a problem that remote countries or developing countries are dealing with. It's a reality that's present here in the European Union. The rural area is more vulnerable to poverty and food insecurity because incomes are lower and there's limited access to basic services. In this context, the common agricultural policy must be seen not as a policy supporting farmers, but rather as an essential instrument of social and territorial cohesion whereby the Union can fight this phenomenon. Investments in agriculture and basic services contribute directly to a stable income and to access to proper food. And when we talk about children, our responsibility is much greater. For many children in the EU, The meal they get at school is the only meal they eat in a single day. This school food scheme is not a secondary program. It means equal opportunities and the future for these children. So I want to make sure that the Commission, in its turn, will make sure that the strategy fighting poverty actively tackles famine and hunger. The future of Europe is cast into doubt when food insecurity affects children.
Bierze pan poseł Jean-Marc Germain, 1 minuta.
Mr. Marc
Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues, in Europe, tens of thousands of our fellow citizens and their children cannot properly warm their homes. They can't get health care. They can't pay for their meals. They suffer social isolation. This is a brutal reality, and it's shameful in a continent as rich as our own. Poverty is not fate. It's created by people, and it's vanquished by people as well. That's why I salute this report, moving towards eradicating poverty in Europe by 2035. Together with my group, the S&D, we will be fighting hard for a European social fund that is 30% increased in the next MFF. And these funds also have to be sufficient. 20 billion for the child guarantee and money available for social exclusion and the homeless, etc. We need a specific fund for housing of 100 billion euros. That is the route we should be pursuing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Regina Doherty for 1.5 minutes.
Mr. President, child poverty isn't inevitable. It's the result of our choices. But we can choose differently. Right across the EU, more than 1 in 4 children are at risk of poverty or social exclusion. And this is not just happening in struggling economies. It's happening in some of the most wealthy, successful societies in the world. Countries with strong growth, thriving businesses and solid public finances still have far too many children starting life with a disadvantage. And the reality is that a country's rising balance sheet doesn't automatically mean that a child gets a warm home, a decent meal and the supports that they need in school. In fact, several of our high-income member states, child poverty rates are higher than the EU average, especially for single parents and children with disabilities. And when that happens, colleagues, we're not just failing those children, but we're actually failing and limiting our own future potential. Because, if I'm to be blunt, today's children are tomorrow's workforce. They are our future entrepreneurs, our skilled workers, our carers, our innovators and our taxpayers. And if we allow talent to be shaped by disadvantage instead of opportunity, we're going to pay the price much later in higher public spending, lost productivity and a loss of social cohesion. So the European Child Guarantee isn't charity, it's common sense. It's about making sure that children have access to the basics of food, housing, healthcare, education, childcare, stuff most of us and our families in this House take for granted. If we're serious about long-term growth, we need to make sure that looking after and investing in children isn't optional, it's an absolute must. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo. Pani poseł, głos zabierze pani.
Thank you. Evelyn Regner for 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, President. Vice President, poverty creates loneliness. It creates shame as well, totally unjustified. Poverty is not just. And frequently work doesn't protect you from poverty. There are many working poor, many women among those which are functioning within this particular internal market. It is a kind of what it means actually is that no stability, no security, no real social net. And this particular situation is organized insecurity, and it is exploitation. And the future poverty strategy of the European Union has to focus on this. We need minimum standards. We need minimum safety systems in place, insurance, protection, pensions, because otherwise, if we don't do all of that, we'll be seeing the same thing over and over again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Mrs. Mendia.
Señorías, con un 21%.
With 21% of the population still in poverty, we will not achieve the aim of lifting 15 million people out of poverty. The increase in the cost of living, the price of housing, and deepening inequalities mean that poverty is an urgent issue to address. Our democracy is at stake. We need a clear roadmap as a strategy with commitments to financing and governance, with solid policies starting from childhood onwards. We need to address intergenerational effects and gender equality. Please, Commission, take our report into considerations and take a multidimensional approach. Think about fair salaries, better public investment in public services, and effective recognition of the right to housing. I call on the Commission to be courageous. We need a budget for the child guarantee. We need a directive on minimum income, and we need a firm commitment with proper funding to public services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm opening the round of Catch the Eye. Please stick to your speaking time, then everyone will have a chance to take the floor. The first is Mr. López Aguilar.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner Misato, de nuevo un debate sobre...
Once again, a discussion about a social Europe, the fighting against poverty, European strategy against poverty. And those of us who are legal experts, we know that it's guarantees, social guarantees that are necessary. The guarantee, the European guarantee for youth as well has to be there. This is something that the Parliament has focused on, and it's in the budget there. Millions are in there, but we need a generational approach as well in order to deal with poverty. It is a huge challenge. We have to fight against access to housing, and we have to fight homelessness. There's something else that the European Union has to do in order to help people, is not only mobilize those 60 billion for affordable housing for Europeans, but fight speculative investments in the housing market, in the real estate market, which creates totally prohibitive situations for young people, but not only for young people, for all Europeans. This is something we have to fight concertedly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I give the floor to Mr. Tynkkynen.
Arvoisa puhemies.
President, this paper on the EU's anti-poverty strategy is a prime example of how out of touch the European left is with reality. This paper contains many references to declarations, indicators, and holistic approaches. To top it all off, poverty is defined as structural injustice. Well, you on the left have been busy building these structures in Europe for decades. And yet, your solution always seems to be the same. More public money, more income transfers, and more legislation in the EU. This left-wing wish list is expensive. It is ineffective and it is absurd. Endless expansion of public power and income transfers is not the solution to poverty. It will ultimately lead to the ruin of the state or the federal state. Poverty is reduced through work, entrepreneurship, and responsible immigration and economic policies.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is now Mr. Alavanos. You have the floor, sir.
A report with information about poverty. It was voted on by neoliberal people who have always served the capitalist policies of the European Union in increasing poverty, energy poverty, reducing wages, making homes a subject of commerce, a merchandise. Human beings have been left poorer, but at the same time, profits have been reaped. And nothing has been said about the defense industry and the funneling of money into it as well. Capitalists of the European Union have been readily and very, very quickly destroying all that is necessary for the simple man on the street to be able to live with respect and without poverty. So what we're calling for are collective bargaining agreements, and we feel that there are to be no sacrifices there, no sacrifice as far as a social funding as well. People have to be able to live as they ought to live in the 21st century.
Thank you. Giuseppe Lupo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Vice President Mizzato, colleagues, the struggle against poverty has to be a priority for the European Union. The decision of the Commission to launch its first anti-poverty strategy before the end of the year, with special attention to children, is very good news for all European citizens. Unfortunately, poverty particularly affects the weakest areas of our countries. That's internal areas, islands, places like Sicily and Sardinia that have a structural disadvantage. In regions like these, not many schools have got their own canteens where the kids can have a decent lunch. And that is a limitation on the employment opportunities for mothers in particular. The EU needs to invest in social policies, particularly in the MFF, and these have to be focused on disadvantaged areas to reduce the disparities. And I hope that the new strategy will do just this.
Thank you. Maria Zaharia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I simply wanted to congratulate the rapporteur for a very, very serious effort to return dynamically to this particular issue of poverty. It ought to be on the political agenda. Recognition that millions of Europeans are unable to cover their basic needs, housing, energy, health, dignified work. This is a very important step forward, this particular report. It indeed focuses on the important issues. The responsibility now is on the shoulders of the Commission, of the Member States, to have policies in place which will help us to be able to deal with the causes of poverty, class differences, insecurity, and the increased cost of living. So a very important political message is being delivered right now that we will have to have national policies, European Union policies that will truly target poverty. Thank you.
Thank you. Marco Vesrigai, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. In Croatia, the youngest member of the EU, as much as 21.7% of the population live in risk of poverty or social exclusion. This is about 800,000 people. So what we need to say is that poverty does not strike all areas equally. Smaller, rural, less developed areas are more exposed to risk in the coming period. Why is this so? Because in the new multi-annual financial plan, cohesion and common agricultural policy will receive less money, and that will be less money for rural development, infrastructure, social inclusion, exactly there where it's needed most. I think this is unacceptable, and I believe that European fight against poverty must have a strong social component, social protection, and funds should be distributed to citizen regions that are most at risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Commission, the floor will be taken by Roxana Manzato, the Vice President.
Yes, thank you for a very rich and intense debate. I thank you, João, for the report, for the proposals. I thank to everybody who contributed. Of course, it is no easy task to take on the battle against poverty and exclusion, but I think it's a task that we must all embrace, and to do so with all the energy and all the belief that our citizens need it and deserve it. We cannot speak of democracy, of security, of safety, of prosperity, while you accept that 100 million Europeans are at risk of poverty and social exclusion, out of which many children. I want you to also to know that I appreciate the strong calls for the reinforced child guarantee. And as I've said, it will be a central part of our anti-poverty strategy. And of course, it's an important part of the MFF discussions and debates. But I will emphasize again and again, as I mentioned in the education debate, intervening into this area, fighting poverty is systemic. It is going beyond what we invest with European Social Fund Plus or our social budget in member states. It is a holistic approach, and it is a holistic vision that we need to embrace and to tackle through all policies, from healthcare to fiscal policies. It is a mix. And this needs to be ever more important, tackling poverty, as we are looking at our society facing technological AI transformations that help us for the better, but that also must empower our citizens. So with this in mind, I hope that we will work together so that the anti-poverty strategy is strong, it delivers, and that we are able to achieve our 2030 targets, and especially to pave the way for our 2050 ambitious objective of eradicating poverty in Europe, as ambitious and as complex as this dream might be. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję, pani komisarz.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. Now I give the floor to the rapporteur, Mr. João Oliveira, 2 minutes.
Obrigado. Thank you very much, President. Well, I wanted to stress the importance of the debate we've had this afternoon and all of the contributions we've heard. I just wanted to stress one factor that seems very important to pick out at the end of the debate. It's the need for a systemic approach to the problems of poverty. It needs to be a global approach, putting together the different policies that can lead to a fairer distribution of wealth. It's an unequal distribution of wealth that lies at the root of poverty, and only if we solve this basic problem can we really change the situation and achieve our objectives for eradicating poverty. Madam Commissioner, we put together this report trying to listen to people in a situation of poverty, listening to their issues and their proposals so that they could look to how to solve the issues they face, so that they can express their concerns, make demands in more political terms. So I wanted to stress the importance of all of the contributions we heard. I could pick out a few, but I wanted to pick out the contributions from the European Anti-Poverty Network, UNICEF, Save the Children, and the UN Special Rapporteur for Extreme Poverty. These were very important contributions, and they really fed into the work that we did. I'd also like to thank all of the shadow rapporteurs and the Secretariat in the EMPL committee for all of the work that's been done, that's allowed us to conclude the work at this stage with success. And I hope that the plenary will approve our report tomorrow. And of course, this report has to be a milestone on the path to eradicating poverty and contributing to the strategy that the Commission will present to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before we stop this point, in order to present the declaration, Peter Bistron asked for the floor according to Article 150 of the regulation. You have 1 minute, sir.
Pani.
Ausgerechnet ein Vertreter der CDU hat beklagt.
So somebody from the CDU said that housing in Germany is very expensive and that's a cause of poverty. That's the CDU which caused that. It was a chancellor of the CDU which opened the borders and allowed for millions of migrants to come to Germany. So a little lesson on this. Demand results in an increase in prices. It's not only that, but it was the CDU which is responsible for those senseless embargoes against Russia. They led to the speaker has been interrupted.
Oświadczenie osobiste.
Please stick to your personal statement.
Nie, oświadczenie osobiste jest wtedy, kiedy pan...
No, sir. Personal statement is in order to correct what another member has said.
Dostanie na końcu, ale pani mi zebrała sekund z tych 60.
I will get that at the end, madam.
Proszę bardzo.
The CDU destroyed Germany, and now, along with the socialists, you're doing the same thing. And we from the AfD are not going to play any part of this game whatsoever.
Zamykam debatę. Głosowanie nad tym punktem porządku będzie się jutro, a teraz...
We will vote on this point tomorrow, and now 2 minutes of a technical break. And we're closing this point.
Przystępujemy do realizacji kolejnego punktu porządku obrad.
We are moving on to the next item on the agenda, addressing subcontracting chains and the role of intermediaries in order to protect workers' rights. Mr. Johan Danielsson has the floor now for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Commissioner, we have to dare to describe reality as it is. We have lost control over parts of the employment market. At the end of the day, it's workers and serious companies that are paying the price of this. There are plenty of examples of this. 144 workers have been identified as possible victims of human trafficking in one construction site in the port of Antwerp. That's 144 on the same workplace, all hired by a complex chain of subcontractors. Back during the COVID epidemic in Germany, workers were employed under terrible conditions. There were rural workers in Italy who died, and they were because they were seriously injured in the workplace and were left to die. People are dying on construction sites, and 4 days after the accident, the contractor doesn't know who employed the worker on that site. This is the consequence of a failure on the labour market, in particular in transport, in care, but most of all in the construction sector. In Sweden, the Building Industry Commission identified two problems: joining the EU, low economic growth, and problems finding staff. So there are long subcontracting chains as a result, and then we can actually do something about all of this. We can try and stop the abuse of long subcontracting chains.
Long and complex subcontracting chains, often combined with labour intermediaries, make exploitation easier and accountability harder. With every additional level, transparency disappears. With every additional level, wages drops. With every additional level, risks increases. Public authorities see this as well. The city of Copenhagen found that construction sites relying heavily on subcontracting are massively overrepresented in labour law violations. And this system does not only exploit workers, it is also a problem for serious businesses. Because unregulated subcontracting do not create a free market, it creates unfair competition. They reward companies that cut corners, avoid responsibility and break the rules. Let me give you one concrete example why this does not work either for companies nor workers. Last year, I found out about 29 workers from Uzbekistan that went into debt to get employment in Europe. They were hired by a Lithuanian company and posted to Sweden in the 4th level of subcontracting. It was a tragedy for the workers. They were cheated on their wages and forced to return home, heavily indebted. But the situation is also impossible for the company. They only received 27 euros per hour, a compensation level that makes it impossible to pay taxes, social security and wages according to Swedish collective agreements. This means that the company is put in a situation where they are forced to break the rules. Voting yes tomorrow means choosing fair competition and better protection for workers across Europe. So I urge you to support this report. Thank you for listening.
Bardzo dziękuję. W imieniu Komisji głos zabierze wiceprzewodnicząca wykonawcza pani
Commissioner Roxana Menzatu will take the floor now.
Honourable members, let me express my gratitude to the rapporteur, to Johan, to the shadows for this report, which is very timely for the Commission. On the 4th of December last year, I presented the Quality Jobs Roadmap, and at the same day, we launched the first phase consultation for Equality Jobs Act. At the same time, we launched our preparatory work for our Fair Labour Mobility Package, which will come this year. And in all these documents, subcontracting is presented as a key priority. Subcontracting, I will tell you, I think is a legitimate business model, and I think that it is very important for small and medium enterprises across Europe. Through subcontracting, companies can have access to specialized expertise, they can quickly adapt so they can meet changing business needs, and they can stay competitive. But at the same time, as was stressed by Nicoletta in his report, subcontracting can also lead to abusive practices and to poor compliance with employment rules, and was mentioned here, such as failing to pay wages or social security contributions, or to ensure, and this is even worse, the safety of the workers in their workplace. And this in turn can create, of course, unfair competition and lower the quality of jobs. And this happens particularly in high-risk sectors, as we call them. And some of them could be construction, we can name logistics, food industry, but these are just examples. And therefore, we are now exploring how the European Union should act to tackle such practices that lead to exploitation and to abuse of workers. And this does not mean hindering our businesses' freedom to conduct their businesses. It means ensuring fair competition, and above all, it means protecting workers' rights. And let me draw your attention in particular to the existing legislation in the European Union in labour mobility, and notably in posting. The posting rules already include a mandatory direct subcontracting liability in the construction sector and extended it beyond construction in all sectors where posted workers were concerned. The European Commission is also currently working with the European Labour Authority to be able to facilitate the stronger implementation and enforcement of the applicable posting rules. The question now is what more can and should be done. In the first phase consultation for the Quality Jobs Act, we indicated that, especially in sectors where data show that risk of fraudulent practices is important, that further action could consist, and I name a bit of these, of assessing how liability schemes can be applied at national level, direct liability, joint and several liability, etc., then looking at strengthening enforcement efforts, including via our European Labour Authority, then enhancing transparency in national systems, like, for example, by using pre-qualification or certification systems or national registers without imposing additional burden, or exploring how social dialogue could contribute to the respect of the existing rights. Your report today, that will be voted tomorrow, indeed provides the European Commission with important further orientation of our work. And let me again mention labour mobility. As said at the beginning, there is a specific cross-border dimension of the challenges that are linked to subcontracting, which is also linked to less transparency and more difficult enforcement, especially when it comes to labour intermediation and to the presence of third country nationals. And the Fair Labour Mobility Package intends to look into such challenges, as I've mentioned. Finally, as your report reiterates, a number of demands regarding subcontracting can be addressed also in public procurement. Thus, I would recall that the upcoming revision of the public procurement directives is on way and can address this. The impact assessment that we are working on will analyse carefully the issues that have been raised. Of course, I am looking forward to hearing your views, to exchange with you, to the result of the vote tomorrow. And as I have mentioned, this is extremely important on the Commission's work further on this very important topic. And I cannot not mention it. I think it's our duty to make sure that labour mobility, that labour in general, when connected with our European Union and the single market, shows its light face, the lights of positive opportunity and not its dark face. And this is what should drive our work forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Executive Vice President. Now I will give the floor to for IMCO Committee, Cepeda Jose.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Chairman. Subcontracting is an essential practice in some sectors. It brings specialization, flexibility, and for many companies, it's essential. But I would like to thank Mr. Danielson, my colleague, for all of his work, trying to bring together a vision of our internal market, but also focusing on social rights of all workers. I have to confess something. I'm a member of the General Union of Workers, the biggest trade union in Spain. And this social vision respect for workers' protection, in my view, is essential. We can combine freedom for businesses and liability with these social rights. And I will have tabled an amendment to limit subcontracting to 2 levels in high-risk sectors under the general contractor. That's very important. This is about social justice that the Commission is thinking about. So thank you very much for your work, and I call on you all to support the file and the vote tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, on behalf of the EPP, Mr. Dahl, 2 minutes.
Tak for ordet.
Thank you for having given me the floor. The exploitation of workers is a problem that we're going to have to deal with. But the solution we bring cannot be worse than the problem we're trying to solve. And what we have before us is an anti-Draghi report. We don't want directives on directives, because that will only end up reducing effectiveness. We have to send the right message from Europe. We have to reduce red tape, and it's very difficult to regulate the supply chains of businesses. And here we have a report that offers a solution, limiting subcontracting. This will make it harder to exploit workers, and we have to make sure that member states can better apply existing standards. Directives may seem positive, but we have to make sure that we don't legislate more to create more problems for companies, particularly SMEs of around 50 or 60 workers. If these companies have to comply with all EU legislation, they are going to have to hire more advisors and people to help them. We want modern companies that work well.
Thank you. On behalf of SND, Mrs. Gabriela Bischoff, please.
Thank you, Chair, Vice President. There were hundreds of workers, members of the trade unions, who were standing here, and they talked about this report. They started to talk to us. They came, many colleagues from other groups came to speak to these workers. These long chain subcontracting is something which is very common in transport, in agriculture, in the construction sector. So the rapporteur has really said we need to draw consequences out of this, and we need to have a certain degree of control. There need to be clear rules and more implementation, especially across the borders. Let me just give you an example. I mean, sometimes there are unsustainable situations in Germany, in the case of the meat industry, with very long chains. During the pandemic, this whole situation came out. So people are now being employed directly with reasonable wages, and people have kept a job. Employees get a decent wages, and good work does not necessarily has to be an obstacle to competition. So please do support this report and to send out the message. We are listening and we are dealing with it.
Thank you. And now for the Patriots of Europe, Melanie Disdier.
Thank you. Limiting subcontracting is the embodiment of an idea that seems good but isn't. The pretext here is combating abusive practices, but the text actually proposes to do away with things rather than correcting what doesn't work. According to your logic, you want to do away with companies because some commit fraud. That makes no sense. In addition, it exceeds your powers. Even the IMCO committee has recognised just how off the mark the EMPL committee is. arbitrarily limiting subcontracting to 2 levels, including generalized liability. This is creating a bureaucratic nightmare. These drastic measures will primarily penalize our SMEs and artisans without actually stopping the proper fraudsters. The rapporteur is deluding himself. More European standards will not stop rogue companies. The real cause of this abusive practice is uncontrolled immigration and fraudulent posting of workers, which fuel exploitation and undeclared work. We reject this overregulation and therefore will vote against this text. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the ECR Group, Marlene Malak.
Szanowni Państwo.
Ladies and gentlemen, Europeans do work in long subcontracting chains, but there is a human being at the end of this chain, and we don't know who is actually responsible for our work. Is this a good solution? Can we solve this problem on the member states level? But subcontracting is also about cost reduction, about streamlining investment, and also the jobs for local entrepreneurs. So we need more reason than new regulations. The European Union cannot allow itself to hamper the work of entrepreneurs. Now, multiplying of regulations will not solve the problem. Member states need to have the necessary flexibility to protect their workers, their companies, so less red tape, more responsibility and accountability, and more respect for sovereignty as well.
Thank you. On behalf of Renew, Ms. Yana Tom.
Dear Chair, Commissioner, dear colleagues, we are talking about an important societal issue today. Serious cases of abuse by certain companies that have found ways to use the current system to gain under advantage and very often to escape total responsibility, all at the price of workers caught in the system. We saw it in the meat packing industry in Germany, and a few years ago, before the government decided to take action. We see it more and more in the logistics sector, where the business model brought over by Amazon is fueling a race to the bottom. And we see it in the construction sector, where fraudulent companies find their way into the chain. This leads to workers being forced to work in unsafe conditions and to be left out in the cold without the pay they are entitled to get. I agree 100% with those that say that we need to enforce better the laws we already have. That is the part of the solution. But I cannot see the way to solve all these issues without also stepping in with stricter limits in certain high-risk sectors. And I absolutely cannot agree with those who are quoting letter report trying to undermine this particular paper. Because, you know, guys, we are speaking about letter report like this is kind of buffet where we can pick the dishes we like and ignore the others. Protection of workers' rights is big part of European competitiveness. And if we lose that, we will lose the game. Thank you.
Thank you. Benedetta Scuderi on behalf of the Greens.
Yesterday, hundreds of workers came to Strasbourg to demand dignity in subcontracting chains. They looked me in the eyes and asked for something very simple: being able to go to work and come home again safely. We need to do some basic things. Limit the subcontracting chains, have a direct responsibility along all the chain, direct employees for the main activities, but particularly European legislation that dictates how that line should function. It's a question of dignity, of social justice. It's necessary legislation that can have an impact on hundreds of thousands of people. And yet the right is trying to remove the request for a directive from the text. Why don't we want to support our workers? Why don't we want to improve their lives? Tomorrow we'll vote on this report, and we hope that we will have a request for a directive in it. The lives of many people could improve with this vote. Let's not accept the rhetoric of simplification, which means sabotaging rights. And no, it doesn't help businesses because it leads to unfair competition. As a parliament, we have the duty to protect workers from exploiters through fair legislation. We can't be held hostage by those who want the European Parliament not to legislate. We've heard about the risks of social dumping and deaths in the workplace, but competitiveness can't exist with low wages, with no safety and wages. That's not the Europe we believe in. Colleagues, tomorrow you can choose. Turn your backs on those workers or vote for this report asking the Commission to produce a directive as soon as possible.
Thank you. And now Leila Chaibi on the behalf of the left.
Thank you. 65 for 26 billions in turnovers for our stadiums and our Olympic villages, and at the end of that chain are workers who work in precarious conditions, and often it's at the risk of their health and even their lives. But for companies, these are just subcontractors. This is not about competitiveness, it's about exploitation, and we cannot turn a blind eye to it anymore. Limiting subcontracting to two levels. We need to ensure that when there is fraud or when there are accidents, that companies take responsibility. Yesterday, I met with trade union representatives from Paris Express, and they work on a construction site that started 6 years ago, but they've had 6 deaths. That's just in the first 3 years. Not to talk about injuries, and they've now stopped subcontracting below 2 levels, and that means that there has been no deaths over the past 3 years. Madam Commissioner, now it's up to you to act. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisbeth Zaman for 2 minutes, please.
Commissioner, colleagues, 188 subcontractors for a single site. And apparently this actually happens. So let us be clear about one thing. People who work under some subcontract is important, it's legitimate, and a lot of companies work correctly, and a lot of people make their money this way. But very often this is not the case. Remember the port of Antwerp, where a project, the Borealis project, hundreds of workers were exploited. And this was not just an isolated situation. It's too many of the workers that pay the price. We want to make sure that this subcontracting model is simply a way to pay low wages and to exclude the unions. We need to make sure that workers are protected, but at the same time, our good companies need to be protected against disloyal competition. The cowboys need to be kicked out. The Belgian model shows that a strict and fair impact can really have an effect, and this needs to be done at European level now. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Idoia Mendia. 1 minute, please.
Working now in the 21st century shouldn't mean risking your life. And if we identify where accidents happen in Europe, it happens more in temporary and subcontracted work, and especially in the illegal muddy waters of subcontracting. They don't receive risk prevention training, and the companies think it's none of their business. Accidents belong to the 19th century. People falling from heights, people getting trapped, and they're concentrated in specific sectors. Today we're asking for a legislation that can shed light on this, these long subcontracting chains that make it impossible to find anybody liable for abuse and illegal behaviour. This initiative is not going against businesses. It's going to be good for SMEs, which are 95% of our economic fabric. We talk about simplification, but careful. There's nothing simpler than directly employing workers or directly employing a company that does the job.
Thank you, Paul Shekeres.
Thank you very much, President. Madam Commissioner, in Hungary, there are now 1 million more people in work than in 2010. Protecting workers' health and lives is a fundamental duty in a work-based society. And this is why we've taken concrete steps over the past few years. We have increased fines for employers, especially in cases of serious or fatal accidents. We have introduced stricter rules for the investigation and reporting of workplace accidents, and in doing so we ensure that the lessons learned can be built into prevention. And Hungarian public procurement rules are very clear. If you breach worker protection rules, you cannot access public funds. It's important to inform employees about health and safety regulations as well, especially in high-risk sectors such as construction. We can only guarantee fair competition and protect workers properly if we combine prevention, digital transparency and modern inspection tools. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now Chris van Dijk, please.
President, Commissioner, social dumping and unfair competition, this is a plague because companies, people and our single market suffers from this because basically the single market is based on mutual trust and a free circulation of people and services, and this can only be done if we take each other seriously as far as our rules are concerned. So that is why I want to call for the mutual recognition of professional bans. I mean, somebody who has worked in a given country and has a professional ban, then goes to another country in the EU and can continue working without any problems. People who work in the trade unions are being treated badly, so we need to try and have free circulation, but at the same time we need to make sure that these rules are applicable across the borders, because if not, as a society we're paying a very high price, so please deal with it.
Thank you. Brigitte van den Berg, 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much. People working excessive hours and unpaid overtime, people not being able to take a break, people working in unsafe working conditions. This is reality for millions of people working in Europe. And when it happens, and when we ask the question, who is actually responsible, we see in the whole chain, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. And this is what we need to fight. And I think that this report found the right balance, because subcontracting as a concept is not the problem. Abuse is the problem. And we need to fight that. We need to fight that because it has nothing to do with competitiveness. It has to do with unfair competition. It has to do with unfair competition at the cost of people. Or, as maybe Shaggy would say it, you may think that you're a player, but you're just completely lost. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the floor goes to Vicent Marza Ibanez.
Seamos claros, cuando se habla de la subcontratación hablamos.
Let's be clear, when we talk about subcontracting, we're talking about precarity and worse service. Today, in the industry, 4 people working at the same desk doing the same job. One has a good job because they're directly employed. The second, because they're subcontracted, has much worse conditions. The third and the fourth, as they're working for an external agency, they don't have worse conditions. They don't even have holiday time. This is passing in sectors in Europe. The same thing happens in the care sector. The government subcontracting companies that pays 20 euros an hour and the worker receives 6. This can't be today. This is why we have to end the abuse of subcontracting. We have to guarantee good working conditions for all workers. And this shouldn't be an exception. Every trade union, every worker doesn't have to work alone. There should be a European directive that is very clear on this point. This is why tomorrow we're going to vote in favour. And we need this vote in favour to turn into a European directive for all workers. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now next speaker, Ms. Lee Anderson. 1 minute, please.
President, in this kind of abuse, we are talking about modern slavery. We have been able to read about such examples. For instance, in Finland, one time after another, Ukrainian refugees have been exploited in the shipyards in Turku or in the new data center construction site in Hamina. In Nepalese restaurants, there are chefs who are exploited. Long subcontracting chains have facilitated, made it possible for such abuse to take place, and we have to address this problem, because when you have power and responsibility, you also have to see to it that workers have their rights. We need action both in EU and in member states. Trade unions should have the right to collective action, group action, and we should put some limits to how people are used. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Branislav Ondrush, 1 minute, please.
Colleagues, on Friday, the 2nd of November in 2012, 4 workers died during the construction of a highway bridge near Kurimani in eastern Slovakia. No one provided them with protection at work because they were not employees but self-employed workers hired by a company that was subcontractor of a subcontractor of a subcontractor. They were fifth in the supply chain, which means the main contractor didn't even know that these people were actually working for him. According to the European Confederation of Construction Contractors, 94% of construction companies are in fact small contractors at the end of a subcontracting chain. But in Slovakia, this approach is also spreading to other sectors. I have found many such subcontractors on the premises of industrial companies, and the only ones who is profiting are the large companies at the beginning of the chain. They are avoiding responsibility, passing on costs, and above all risk. The outsourcing of pandemic is a cancer on the labour market. Therefore, we must act for the benefit of workers. That means restriction of subcontracting and the direct responsibility of the main in the whole entire chain.
For 1.5 minutes.
Sehr geehrte Frau
Madam Commissioner, everyone knows how subcontracting works in everyday life. So there will be a general contractor, and then there'll be electricians and roofers and things working beneath that, and that's how things can be done efficiently. And it's about subcontracting that we are voting on this week. One thing is very clear. We need to tackle exploitation, misuse of subcontracting and criminal activities. We cannot be tolerant of that whatsoever. However, a new directive on subcontracting chains is not the right approach in my view. In the EU, around 17% of SMEs are subcontractors, and we know how much this could impact freedom to enter into contracts, and it could jeopardize employment. That is the situation we're in. In the current geopolitical situation, subcontracting is not a minor issue. We don't need a new directive. No, we need strict enforcement of existing laws. Macron talked about Europe's need to wake up, and he said if we don't do anything, then Europe will be in danger in 5 years. And I think if we do the wrong thing now, then we have the same problem.
Colleague Wexler, would you like to take a blue card questions from Benedetta Scuderi, 644?
Madame Wessner, lei ha parlato.
You talked about the fact.
To use headphones. It should be there. You can start now.
Madame Wexler.
Ms. Wexler, you talked about the fact that there are indeed abuses in our subcontracting chains. This leads to very serious abuses of workers, but then you've said we don't need a directive, we don't need rules, because that would have an impact on our businesses. How can we effectively avoid that abuse without a directive? It's not just about implementing existing rules, because there are no rules that currently respond to what this Parliament's report is saying. So how can we protect workers?
Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much, Ms. Scudder, for your question. I didn't say we don't need any legislation. No, I said that we should implement the legislation we already have. And based on subsidiarity, we don't need to regulate everything at European level. That was my message. It's clear. We have a directive from 2014 which regulates subcontracting in the public sector, and I think that we have enough rules at European level and at national level.
Thank you. The next speaker is Blinkevičiūtė for 1 minute.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. Subcontracting chains and intermediaries must not become a means of circumventing workers' rights and to exploit them. However, today we see the opposite too often: lower wages, unsafe working conditions, and the exploitation of workers. This is a matter of social justice. When responsibility is fragmented through long subcontracting chains, workers remain without real protection, whereas responsible employers face unfair competition. This report makes it clear the EU must ensure that workers' rights should apply to everyone, regardless of how many intermediaries stand between the worker and the final employer. We need joint responsibility throughout the subcontracting chain, as well as greater transparency and effective controls. We must achieve this by creating an EU-level legal framework.
Next speaker, Carlo Ciccioli. For 1 minute, please.
Grazie, Presidente. Thank you. The protection of workers from unloyal competition needs to be implemented, because very often there are opaque companies, and this damages both the honest companies and the workers. This is a true problem, but I think the way it is being tackled is not correct. We need very strict controls, and we need to apply the laws. In Italy, we have organized networks that manage workers outside the rules. You get irregular extra-community workers to come onto the market using false documents, and this leads to social dumping and disloyal competition. But I don't think through a directive we're going to solve the problem. If you put very strict rules, this could also mean that you're penalizing SMEs and that you're not creating any flexibility. You need strict control, but no new rules. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Guarda for 1 minute, please.
12 hours a day, with no protection, with no contracts, invisible. 2,000 workers are in those conditions in Treviso, in just one province of Veneto, which is my region, and just in the agriculture sector. 500 subcontracting agencies are under control, and this is an inhumane system against human rights, against the qualities that we spout so often, while we are crushing the weakest. This is not good Europe, social Christian Europe. We want European rules that are binding. 2 levels of subcontracting maximum, no subcontracting in core business, and no more abuse. Colleagues, we need a directive to make the invisible visible. Those people who die on the job, degrading housing, they're not a coincidence. They're the results of a system that we have the moral obligation to dismantle. Thank you.
Thank you. And the floor now goes to Mr. Clausen for 1 minute.
Denmark, where jeg kommer fra.
Thank you. I'm from Denmark, and we've seen many examples of these endless subcontracting chains. Social dumping, exploitation. This costs human lives. We know that this increases economic crime. That's the reality, and therefore I'm surprised that a Danish MEP in this parliament is saying that we don't need to do anything about it. We don't have any problems. Now, if he doesn't want us to do anything about this situation which is unfair for workers, and if he doesn't want to combat economic crime, what about Europol? Europol says that European crime networks, the most dangerous ones, are actually hidden behind legitimate companies. We need to do something about that. It's on our doorstep. This is an issue we need to tackle, and I would like to see a constructive response. How are we going to respond to this challenge?
Thank you. Now the floor goes to Delchos.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Well, the subcontracting chains are an essential part of our economy. They're a legitimate tool, which makes it possible for our companies to innovate, to compete. And it's a tool that also supports a large number, millions of jobs across the European Union. Now, if this works according to the law, it is efficient, it provides stability and job opportunities in many different sectors. The objective could never be that you limit subcontracting through a directive. What you need to do is you need to implement this properly. You need to be efficient in the use of state legislation, which already exists and is already in force. You need to look at the places where there are true risks without imposing further burdens on companies that are already dealing with their commitments. And they need to have legal certainty. And what they certainly don't need are any automatic obligations, which are going to penalise their legitimate business. So protect workers does not mean that you're going to demonise the intermediaries. You need to legislate responsibly. You need to protect the labour rules, but also fight for the competitiveness of companies and preserve a labour market which creates quality jobs, also through subcontracting. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the floor goes to Ms. Wind for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm a trade unionist. I'm a social democrat. You may imagine that I want to take up the cause of people who are not being paid, or the workers. But actually I want to talk about businesses, because when we talk about subcontracting, we're not just talking about protecting workers, we're also talking about protecting the businesses that do respect the rules. So many of them are blocked or edged out of the market because other companies who don't follow the rules and have suspicious or dark business models are pushing them out. So we have to celebrate those companies who are working for quality. For example, where interns have a contract. But how can these companies go forward where fraud and social dumping seems to be profitable? As a society, do we want companies who are cheating the system? These big companies who oppress workers, or do we want to encourage a different model which is responsible and does things according to the rules?
Thank you. The floor goes to Mr. Eriksson for 1 minute.
Thank you. I am stunned. I am stunned to see that the Social Democrats want to undermine the century-long social model. This has worked for a long time. You want to intervene in the relationship between business owners and workers. Subcontractors are a key part of the employment market in our country. This is about the economy. We want a competitive Europe, and in this very difficult context, we don't want to overburden companies with more red tape, because most companies do things properly. Some don't. That's true, and they need to be pursued. But we shouldn't punish the companies that do things properly, because they create competitiveness and growth.
Thank you. Mr. Kennes, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, voorzitter.
Thank you, Commissioner. The Parliament is going to be voting on a crucial report, a report which calls upon the Commission to put an end to all this subcontracting. In so many sectors, this type of situation has become the rule, that is to make work even less safe. But on the other side of this House, you want to remove as much as possible from this report. They don't want to have any agreements. They don't to reduce subcontracting to 2 levels. They don't want that either. They say, oh, we'll need to control the rules. All the member states need to carry out controls, but member states are dismantling most of those rules. We want measures to prevent workers from being exploited. In Spain, where we have legislation, in Spain, the legislation protects workers, but apparently in this House, you do not want to protect the workers. But we'll look at you. We'll see who stands on the side of the worker and who doesn't. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the floor goes to Ms. Marczulaitis-Walczak for 1 minute and a half.
Chair, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. The security and protection of employees is a fundamental issue. The legislation is there to a large extent. The problem is that it is not always effectively implemented. We need more control institution cooperation. Subcontracting is a routine element of the market for many SMEs in Poland. Very often it is the only way to participate in bigger projects. That is why we are asking for more transparency, but not rigid principles or rigid limits that could weaken the competition. We need to order the market where the excess of intermediaries make the one who do the real work lose on it, especially in the sector of transports. But this cannot happen at the cost of honest companies and those that act effectively. Instead of adding on new barriers, we need to have more controls and clear responsibility in the whole chain. Wherever there are abuse cases, we can enhance responsibility, but not in order to burden those entrepreneurs who are honest. New legislation should not mean more administrative burden and should not undermine solutions that are functioning well in individual countries. The public procurement should go to honest bidders, and it's also good for stable chains.
Thank you. The floor goes to Mr. Engel for 1 minute.
Across Europe, subcontracting chains have become a blind spot in labour law, in construction, agriculture, transport and logistics. Some chains reach even 6 or 7 levels, leaving workers unprotected when wages go unpaid, accidents happen or responsibilities vanish. Millions of mobile workers and migrant workers are affected and often forced to pay illegal fees through unregulated intermediaries. The result is shameful social dumping, unfair competition and systematic violation of basic labour and social rights. This is not an enforcement problem, this is a rules problem. As long as responsibility can be diluted, exploitation will continue. The Commission faces a political choice. Either we tolerate a two-speed Europe of work, or we adopt an ambitious directive on subcontracting chains. As Socialists and Democrats, we call for a directive that includes a full chain liability where the client and its subcontractor are liable for labour and social rights violations, a limit on subcontracting layers and a strict framework on intermediaries. They must be registered in the European Union and subject to clear standards and obligations to avoid any risk of gangmaster practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The floor goes to Sergio Umberto for a minute and a half.
Thank you very much, Chairman, Commissioner. Colleagues, the subcontracting chains are now longer than ever. And when responsibility is diluted over the course of these chains, the workers are the most vulnerable. The report that we're debating today deals with a serious problem. It's the way in which these subcontractors avoid social responsibility. We need to establish responsibility in order to guarantee fair competition and effective protection of workers. Fighting this abuse is a clear priority for us. But it's clear as well that subcontracting in itself is a legitimate tool that can be very useful in the European economy. What we have to fight against is the abusive use of these chains. We shan't punish those companies that obey the rules, and we need to make clear rules for SMEs. We don't need more red tape. We need better taxation and rules that are applied coherently. And we need enhanced cooperation from authorities. We need to protect workers' rights, guarantee a fair single market. These are not contradictory objectives. These are two sides of the same coin.
Thank you. The floor goes to Ms. Regner for 1 minute. Thank you.
Frau Vizepräsidentin der Kommission, in diesen Tagen reden wir viel von Wettbewerb.
We talk a lot about competitiveness today, but we need to talk about fair competition. We should protect our SMEs and our companies from subcontracting, because work is being systematically outsourced, and then nobody is liable for unpaid workers or accidents. This is no coincidence. This is an unfair business model that is being implemented deliberately, and it circumvents workers' protection. We must put an end to this. We need to have proper liability. Subcontracting chains should be limited. We need to have binding standards for this to protect workers, and we need to promote direct employment more instead of outsourcing. So to the Commission, we say good work needs clear rules and it needs clear liability as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Solomons for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Commissioner, colleagues. Well, Mikhailo he died on a site in Belgium. He was a Ukrainian. He was working for a Polish company. He'd never worked for that company before. That company was then subcontracted to a company in the Netherlands. The company disappeared, and the accident was never clearly declared. His family has not received any kind of compensation in the construction sector and also in logistics and in the food sector. This type of subcontracting is a business model. You get companies that dilute responsibilities. The true employer is almost impossible to find. Some of these chains, these subcontracting chains, could be up to 17 level. The longer the chain, the worse the workers are off. And that, I think, is the reason why a directive is indispensable. We need to get a limit to the chains. So we need to protect the physical integrity of workers. We need to make the main contractor responsible, and that is right up to the very end of this chain. And the practice of gang masters, there needs to be access to training for workers. You need to strengthen controls and inspections. We need to put an end to workers' exploitations and practices that literally kill people. Thank you.
KGI procedure, I have 6 names on my list, and first will be Kostas Mavridis. Kostas Mavridis, floor is yours. No, it's a KGI procedure, colleague, so yes. you can go to the Kostas Mavridis, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This report shows the need for a cohesive approach to abuse and those intermediary companies in outsourcing of employment. Employment exploitation is a breach of human rights, and it undermines fair competition in our economy. By the way, the worker is the weaker party compared to the employer. We are trying to just apply compliance with the law. We want to protect workers' rights in practice and not just on paper. Furthermore, a proper appliance of European law means that there are very slow procedures. Often in Cyprus, unfortunately, workers try to get their rights respected, and they are not. And because of the bureaucracy, the answer is simple.
Next speaker, Sebastian Tinkinen.
Arvoisa Mr. President, how do we ensure that labour migration does not lead to exploitation of migrants? Believe it or not, we don't need EU-wide strategies. We don't need complex new legislation. We don't need to increase the power of trade unions. We need higher income thresholds for labour migration. If a person is ready to travel thousands of kilometres to come here to do an inhumanly low-paid job, that tells us that they are not coming here for work. They come here because this job is the key to European social security. And this being the primary goal, the newcomer will be exposed to exploitation and abuse. If we want to attract talent who come here after work, we need higher income thresholds. The Finnish government raised the minimum income threshold to 16,100 euros per month, and this is the right way.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President. We all know about construction sites, whether it's a building or whether it's a hospital, and the workers all work for different subcontractors, one for the cement, one for the scaffolding, etc. And a study has identified up to 188 subcontractors on the same construction site. And we see it in other sectors as well, in industry, in farming, in the food industry, and so forth. It's become a whole business model to maximise profits, to weaken workers' rights, and to literally kill workers. And you can see the right here saying, that, oh, you've misunderstood this, that we know better than workers, we know better than those who literally die at the workplace, and that's what's irresponsible. We need a European law to limit these practices, to limit this social dumping, and we will count on you tomorrow and afterwards.
Zacharia.
Colleagues, the debate on this outsourcing and subcontracting can't ignore the consequences. This undermines workers' rights, and it has to be ended. When this work goes through intermediaries, we are creating a system of different speeds of workers, so that nobody is actually employed in reality. The people are doing the same work in the same space, but some people have less protection, lower wages, and less safety. Worker is not a product. It can't be considered a compressible cost. Workers need to be directly employed with full rights and collective agreements and a clear responsibility of the employer. We need to end these opaque forms of employment in order to protect workers' rights. Thank you.
The next speaker, Vytenis Povilas Andriukaitis.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner. This directive is essential. It is essential to foresee the responsibility from the very first contractor towards the subcontractor, and the responsibility has to be very clear and big, so that when it is transferred, those who started the subcontracting network should not avoid the responsibility. If we have the 17 subcontractors, it's absolutely clear that this is a model and they are all interrelated. This is part of the shadow economy. This is the best example of it. Moreover, it distorts the social market and creates problems for abuse. And what's worse, we don't have any interim registers to trace it back. That's why the directive is indispensable, and we have to have a very clear responsibility outlined. And what's more important is for those who start the subcontracting chain.
Yes, thank you. I have to be fair to everybody. Next speaker, Lefteris Nikolaou Alavanos.
This report is going to condemn workers by refusing to make these intermediaries responsible. It doesn't even require these types of companies to be withdrawn, but it just says that there should be some rules over this abuse. This is the European Union. We've got 13-hour workdays in Greece. We've got minimum wage being decided at company level. We don't expect anything from neoliberal capitalists. We've got the Greek government supporting the trade union mafia, which is fighting against the actual collective agreements. We now need to support the workers and the trade union movement, which against those employers which support exploitation.
I'd like to ask to take the floor for the Commissioner, Executive Vice President Mânzatu. The floor is yours, Commissioner. Oh, well, Vice President. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you for the debate. What is clear is, of course, that we need to work to design a targeted and balanced policy response to all the challenges linked to subcontracting that you've mentioned. My aim, our aim in the Commission is, I've said it and I repeat it, twofold. First of all, to protect the workers who are deprived of their rights in subcontracting chains. At the same time, to recognize the added value of subcontracting as a legitimate business model. And here, listening to you, I must acknowledge that I had two concepts in mind. Subcontracting chains that do their job, and subcontracting chains that are designed to abuse, to exploit, to get cheap labor. And these are two separate concepts, I must say. Your report that will be voted tomorrow is, I think, a very good document, identifies challenges that are in place, that were debated today. What are the risky sectors? What is the scope to be covered? What mechanisms, solutions can be used? And I mention again here joint and several liability, direct liability, who is responsible. This is very important. You also underlined in the debate the need and the importance to leave enough flexibility to companies, and you stressed also the role of enforcement and labour inspections, national level, cross-border like. We will take into consideration the inputs that you've offered, of course the vote tomorrow, in the two documents, initiatives that I've mentioned, first the Fair Labour Mobility Package, then the Quality Jobs Act. And in doing so, I mention it again, I do not believe that it is acceptable that we have a labour market with more speeds. Workers are first class or second class. It's dignity that we need to offer to our citizens and our workers. It's the promise of social rights in a dignified Europe. And I think we can together achieve this. Thank you again for the report, the topics, and the debate.
Thank you very much, Executive Vice President and Rapporteur. Johan Danielsson has the floor again.
Thank you. Thank you also to the Commissioner, and thank you for the debate. It is perhaps clear that we are not agreeing to 100% in this chamber, but let's be clear about one thing. If you want to fight for serious businesses, you also have to regulate subcontracting. This is also why everyone in this House have received letter of support from the European Umbrella Organization, representing more than 200,000 small and medium-sized road transport undertakings. This is why small and medium-sized construction companies ask us to regulate subcontracting. And the fact that Business Europe instead have decided to defend the right of big companies to make profit while subcontracting away all the work, all the responsibility, leading to exploitation of workers, this is something that they quite frankly should be ashamed of. To limit subcontracting and to regulate labour intermediaries, it will not solve all the problems, but it will be one important step to clean up our labour markets. When one of the biggest Swedish construction companies self-imposed a limitation on themselves on 2 tiers of subcontracting, they publicly stated that one of the main reasons for this was to fight against work-related crime. This is one company that do this at their workplaces. Our role as legislator is to make sure that we fight work-related crime on all workplaces in Europe. Tomorrow you have the opportunity to do so by voting in favour of the report. Thank you for the debate.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, debate on this point in agenda is closed, and what will take place tomorrow.
Dear colleagues, and now the Alliance of Greens has given us their decision, which will be included in the minutes of this sitting regarding the budget Control Committee. Daniel Boselager will be replaced by Dennis Rasmussen. The next item on the agenda, a joint debate concerning accession to the Convention of the 2nd July 2019 on the recognition and enforcement of foreign judgments in civil war and commercial matters. Oral question to the Commission, accession of Montenegro to the Convention of the 2nd July 2019 on the recognition of and enforcement of foreign judgments in civil or commercial matters.